6 men, 1 harbor, 7 ships destroyed in a single night. The Japanese never saw them coming. They weren't pilots. They weren't sailors. They were ghosts of the deep, the frogmen. The Pacific was a graveyard. By 1943, the Japanese empire stretched wide, guarded by warships, garrisons, and fear. Their harbors, they believed, were untouchable. Layers of steel nets, patrol boats circling like wolves, and floodlights slicing the night. No submarine, no aircraft, no intruder could hope to break through. At least that was the myth. Yet, somewhere in the shadows of Allied bases, a different kind of soldier was preparing to challenge that belief. They weren't aces with medals pinned to their chest. They weren't celebrated infantry charging across beaches. They were anonymous, invisible, unknown even to most of their own countrymen, frogmen. They trained in silence, in darkness, in the suffocating black of the ocean. Where others saw terror, they learned to breathe calmly. Where others drowned, they survived. They became the human embodiment of stealth, creatures who moved like shadows beneath the surface. The Japanese never accounted for such men. To them, naval war meant battleships thundering across the waves or kamikaze planes screaming from the skies. The idea that a handful of swimmers could slip past every defense and bring destruction was absurd, but war has always favored the unexpected. In the spring of 1943, Allied planners began whispering of a mission so bold it bordered on madness. A raid into a Japanese harbor, an operation designed not just to sink ships, but to break the enemy's confidence in their own waters. 6 men would carry the weight of this impossible task. 6 men against an empire. And though the Pacific stretched endless, though the harbors blazed with watchfulness, these men believed they could succeed. Because they knew something the Japanese didn't. Silence itself could be turned into a weapon. Still, even among their comrades, few knew their names. They were a rumor, a ghost story. Stories passed in hushed tones by sailors on distant islands. Stories of swimmers who could appear from nowhere, strike, and vanish back into the sea. That nightmarish rumor was about to become reality, but before they could strike, they had to exist. The world had never seen soldiers like them. Their roots stretched back to desperation, missions where traditional methods had failed. Bridges needed to be blown, harbors sabotaged, beaches cleared of mines. Ordinary sailors couldn't do it. Divers trained for salvage work weren't enough. Something new had to be born. And so the Allies began forging the first underwater commandos. They were not chosen for strength alone. Bravery mattered, but more than that, calmness under suffocating pressure. Imagine swimming in pitch-black water, unable to surface, lungs straining against a crude oxygen rebreather. One mistake, and the carbon dioxide would build up in your blood until your vision blurred and your body seized. These men had to master their own fear before they could ever fight the enemy. Training was merciless. Hours spent in freezing surf, learning to swim silently with explosives strapped to their chests. Nights spent navigating by the stars, surfacing only enough to draw breath. They practiced approaching mock harbors, slipping past guards who had no idea their quarry was already beneath their feet. Every movement was calculated, every breath measured. Every heartbeat a reminder of how thin the line was between life and death. Unlike bomber crews or infantry divisions, frogmen had no glory waiting for them. No parades, no cheering crowds. Their very existence was classified. If they failed, no one would ever know their names. If they succeeded, others would take credit. And yet they trained harder than anyone because they knew their mission was different. They weren't just fighting for territory. They weren't just trying to survive. They were striking at the enemy's soul, at the illusion of safety. Among the Japanese, safety was a weapon. Harbors were sanctuaries where ships could refuel, repair, and prepare for the next campaign. To touch those sanctuaries was unthinkable. But that was exactly the point. The 6 men chosen for the mission embodied everything the frogmen represented. Youthful but hardened, fearless but not reckless. Each had endured the brutal selection that weeded out the unfit. Each had learned to slip silently beneath waves, to kill without sound, and to vanish into the night. Their weapons were simple, explosives carried by hand, knives strapped to their thighs, primitive rebreathers that allowed them to stay underwater longer than any ordinary diver. It wasn't technology that made them deadly. It was their will. In the silence of night, they prepared for the impossible raid. Letters were written in case they never returned. Equipment was checked and rechecked. Each man stared into the black water that would soon swallow him whole. The mission brief was simple: destroy as many Japanese ships as possible and escape alive. But the reality was far darker. 6 men were about to pit themselves against an entire empire's defenses. Could 6 shadows truly tear the heart out of a harbor bristling with guards and guns? The Japanese were certain the answer was no, but reality was about to prove them very, very wrong. The harbor lay quiet under the moonlight. To Japanese commanders, it was a fortress, a safe haven carved into the map of their empire. Here warships refueled, transports waited with supplies, and freighters brought steel and oil to feed the war machine. Every entrance was guarded. Patrol boats prowled the waters, their engines growling through the night. Nets stretched across channels, designed to snare submarines and intruders. On the docks, sentries smoked and whispered, rifles slung casually across their shoulders. Above them, searchlights carved the sky into shifting cages of white. It looked impenetrable. The Japanese trusted their defenses completely. They believed no enemy would dare approach. Even if they did, they thought, the nets would stop them, the guns would cut them down, and the tide itself would drown them. Confidence had hardened into arrogance, but hidden within that arrogance were cracks, small oversights that no one noticed. The nets didn't always reach the seabed. Patrol boats grew lazy, their routes predictable. Sentries grew accustomed to quiet nights, their vigilance dulled by routine. To an ordinary sailor, these details meant nothing. But to a frogman, they were invitations. The harbor pulsed with life. Engines rumbled from anchored ships. Oil shimmered across the surface, leaving rainbow trails in the moonlight. Somewhere, a gramophone played faint music in a barracks hut. To the Japanese, this was home. To the frogmen who studied it, it was a battlefield waiting to erupt. 7 ships were docked that night, a mix of freighters, supply vessels, and smaller escorts. Together, they represented thousands of tons of steel and fuel, the lifeblood of the Japanese war effort. To lose even one would hurt. To lose them all would be catastrophic. The Japanese officers laughed that evening, sipping sake in their cabins. Tomorrow would be another ordinary day, another routine patrol, another unbroken illusion of safety. But that night would be anything but ordinary, for even as the harbor slept, 6 men were preparing to invade it from below. The mission had begun long before the frogmen slipped into the water. It began in a cramped briefing room, lit only by a single hanging bulb. Maps of the harbor spread across the table, depth charts, patrol schedules, grainy reconnaissance photos taken by aircraft that had risked everything to fly over enemy territory. The target was clear. The plan, less so. How could 6 men cripple a harbor defended by hundreds? The answer lay in stealth, precision, and courage beyond measure. Each frogman was assigned specific ships. Their charges would be small but devastating, limpet mines, designed to cling to steel hulls like barnacles, invisible until they detonated. Set with timers, they would explode hours later, giving the raiders time to vanish. But even the best plan was fragile. One mistake, one splash too loud, one shadow caught in a searchlight, and the mission would collapse in blood and failure. The men listened in silence as their commander outlined every step. Where they would enter the water, how they would swim past the nets, which ships to target first, where to rendezvous after the attack. Then came the hardest part, writing letters. Each man was told to leave a final note, sealed and kept in case he never returned. The words written that night were never meant to be read unless death claimed them. Some wrote to wives, others to parents. A few simply scrawled a sentence or two, unwilling to admit the possibility of failure. When the letters were finished, they checked their gear, rebreathers strapped tight to their backs, explosives carefully sealed against the salt water. Knives sharp and ready, though they prayed they'd never need them. There was no guarantee the equipment would even work. Rebreathers could fail. Charges might not adhere. Salt water corroded everything it touched. And yet the men trusted their training more than luck. The night of the mission, they sat together in silence, waiting for the signal. No speeches were given, no promises made. Each man carried his own thoughts, his own fears. The only sound was the steady crash of waves beyond the shoreline. At last, the order came. They rose as one, stripped to their gear, and walked into the black water. The sea closed over them, swallowing them whole, 6 shadows, vanishing into the abyss. Their target, 7 ships, sleeping quietly in a harbor that believed it was untouchable. And as the tide carried them forward, the frogmen knew something the Japanese did not. By sunrise, the illusion of safety would shatter forever. The ocean at night is not quiet. It breathes, it whispers, it claws at the shore. But beneath its surface, silence reigns. And into that silence, 6 shadows descended. The frogmen moved slowly, each stroke measured, their bodies merging with the black water. Above them, the Japanese harbor gleamed faintly, lanterns flickering on docks, patrol boats rumbling like restless predators. Every second was a gamble. Every sound, a risk. Even their hearts seemed too loud. The rebreathers hissed softly as they expelled carbon dioxide. One failure could mean drowning before the mission even began. Salt stung their eyes, oil slicks coated their skin, but they pressed forward. Somewhere above, a sentry laughed. Another dropped a cigarette butt into the water, the glowing ember hissing out inches from where the frogmen swam. The Japanese saw nothing. They expected nothing. Their eyes searched the horizon, never the water below. The frogmen pressed against the harbor net. It loomed like a wall of steel, its chains clinking gently in the current. To a submarine, it was an impassable barrier. To a man, it was a puzzle. Slowly, carefully they dove. The seabed was not fully covered. A narrow gap lay at the bottom, dangerous but passable. One by one, the frogmen squeezed through, their bodies scraping mud and stone. On the other side, they emerged into the heart of the enemy. The harbor spread around them, ships looming above like giants. Their hulls stretched downward into the water, black shapes against darker currents. Propellers towered above their heads, blades sharp enough to shred flesh in an instant. Every instinct screamed at them to turn back. But training silenced instinct. They moved closer. Silent shadows. Ghosts beneath steel. Each frogman had his target. One swam to a freighter heavy with supplies. Another drifted toward a patrol craft. The rest fanned out, their fins brushing through the oily water, explosives strapped to their chests. They worked by touch, alone. Hands running along cold steel, searching for the right spot. Hull plates smooth, rivets rough. Then the perfect place. From a waterproof pouch, a limpet mine emerged. Small, almost insignificant but deadly. With a quiet clink, the magnet locked against the hull. A timer was set, ticking silently toward destruction. 1 ship down. 6 more to go. Above them, a patrol boat passed. Its engine thundered, its shadow stretching across the water. A searchlight cut the waves, inches from discovery. The frogmen froze, pressed against the hull, lungs burning as they waited. The light moved on. The danger passed. The mission continued. Another mine. Another hull. Each attachment was a death sentence waiting to be carried out. The men worked quickly but carefully. The ocean gave them minutes, not hours. One diver nearly faltered. His rebreather hissed strangely, bubbles rising where none should. He gripped his chest, fighting panic. To surface meant death. To retreat meant failure. He steadied himself, adjusted the valve, and pushed forward. Failure was not an option. Soon all 7 targets were marked. The harbor above remained oblivious. Japanese sailors strolled the decks, talking, laughing, smoking. Unaware that death clung to their ships beneath the surface, the frogmen regrouped at the rendezvous point, exchanging brief nods in the dark. No words were needed. They had done the impossible, but the hardest part remained: escape. To leave the harbor meant retracing their path, sliding once more beneath the net, slipping past patrols now closer than ever. One slip, one glint of metal, one betrayed ripple on the water, and the mission would end in slaughter. The frogmen swam silently, hearts pounding, the weight of the ocean pressing against them. Every muscle screamed with exhaustion, every second stretched into eternity, and then freedom. They slipped past the net, one by one, vanishing back into the endless Black Sea. Behind them 7 ships waited, their fates sealed by silent hands. The charges ticked on. The night held its breath, and the harbour, still unaware, was about to wake to terror. The harbour slept. Engines idled softly, chains creaked against moorings, and sailors dozed on decks under the warm night air. Then, a low rumble, a vibration deep in the water. The first mine detonated, a freighter lifted out of the sea, its steel hull splitting open with a roar that echoed across the harbour. Flames erupted as fuel spilled, igniting into a towering inferno. Panic erupted. Sirens screamed. Searchlights slashed across the waves, hunting for enemies that weren't there. But before the Japanese could react, another explosion. This one ripped into the side of a patrol vessel. Men were thrown into the water, their cries swallowed by fire and foam. The ship listed heavily, capsizing in minutes. Then another, and another. The harbour became a symphony of destruction. 7 ships, supply vessels, patrol craft, and a transport were torn apart in the span of minutes. Each blast shook the ground, shattered windows, and sent shockwaves rolling across the docks. Japanese officers shouted orders, frantic, disbelieving. How had the enemy breached their defenses? No submarines could have entered. No planes had flown overhead. Yet their fleet burned before their eyes. Sailors fired rifles into the water blindly. Depth charges thundered into the bay, geysers of water rising like black fountains. But the frogmen were already gone, vanishing into the sea's dark embrace. The explosions had not only destroyed ships, they had destroyed certainty. For the first time, the Japanese Navy felt something rare and dangerous: vulnerability. Dawn revealed the scale of the destruction. The harbour was a graveyard. Charred hulls lay half-submerged, smoke still curling into the sky. Oil slicks burned on the water's surface, staining the waves black. Survivors clung to wreckage, their faces hollow with shock. Officers walked the piers in silence, staring at the impossible. 7 ships, gone in one night. And no enemy body, no captured vessel, no trace of how it had been done. Rumors spread faster than the smoke. Some whispered of American submarines with new weapons. Others believed in invisible commandos, demons of the sea. Fear became a stronger enemy than explosives. For the frogmen, the return was silent. They surfaced miles away, hauled themselves into waiting boats, and disappeared back into the shadows of the Pacific. No medals, no parades, no names, just exhaustion, and the knowledge that they had changed the war, because this was not just sabotage. It was psychological warfare. Every Japanese sailor who stepped aboard his ship after that night looked at the water differently. The harbour nets, once symbols of security, now seemed fragile. Safety no longer existed, even in supposedly impregnable bases, and for the Allies it was proof. Proof that 6 men with courage, training, and silence could achieve what fleets sometimes could not. They could slip past defenses, cripple supply lines, and shatter morale. The tactic would spread. Frogmen became pioneers of a new era of naval warfare, precursors to modern combat divers and special forces. But for the Japanese who survived that night, the memory lingered. The sound of explosions echoing through the harbour. The sight of ships vanishing in fire. The realization that war's deadliest weapons were not always battleships or bombers, but men willing to become shadows in the sea. The night 6 frogmen sank 7 ships was more than an operation. It was a warning that in war, nowhere is safe, and it left a question that haunted the Pacific. If 6 men could do this, what else were the Allies capable of?